deal in pure core HR support services from audits to talent management to HR outsourcing and advisory services. So you can find out more about us on our website at www.omlafrica.com. And if you're joining us and you're in the UK or in Europe, then it'll be www.omlafrica.co.uk. Okay, so those of you who follow my roundtable series, you know that I only do 3 of these roundtable virtual series a year. So this is our second one. So if you missed the first one, you can always catch what we talked about. I think the first one was on wellness with special guest speaker. So the roundtables, I also invite other experts or other speakers to speak on topics as well to share insights. So if you missed that first one, you can actually watch it on our YouTube channel. And this is our second one, and then we will have another one. I think it's around about December, and that one we're going to practically look at. I don't know. I've not decided between the 2 topics, but one I was thinking about was looking at actually how the annual HR report should be written, or looking at our key metrics that should go in the annual report. I've not decided yet, but we'll be having a third one in December, and probably I'll have one of our colleagues who specializes in analytics and stuff join us, so that we'll have a meaningful session. So your reports this year will be on top, right? Okay, so that's the roundtable series. I only do 3 in a year. So this is the second one. And the second one, we're looking at how to measure HR performance. And usually when we do these sessions, depending on our numbers, we actually do break out into groups to have discussions and so on. So when we get to certain points, I may just break us into small groups where you get an opportunity to talk to other people who are on the call and network, which I think is very important. And the whole idea of these roundtable series is to actually get us talking and discussing things more than kind of having lectures and things like that. So yes, you get to talk, you get to feedback, I get to summarize and so on. But the idea is to get us kind of talking about some of these issues in addition to highlights of the key main points, which is how are we measuring the HR's performance, which is a very big deal for leaders at the moment. So let's not waste any more time. Let's start having a look at it. So usually our coverage area is very simple. So I do the intro, we look at the synopsis, I just did the intro, and then we go on to look at the definitions, and then we start looking at the discussions, and I start sharing some insights. You also can unmute and share and so on. All right, so I'll guide as we go along. Okay, so before we start talking about the topic, it's always good to get all of us on the same page as to what we even mean by HR's performance, right? Now, we know that people are working in different organizations, and people are having to manage the HR functions. And all of you, majority of you who join me on these are HR managers, or your HR leaders, or your HR officers working in organizations. And so you are responsible for the HR department. However, when it comes to the HR department's performance management or evaluation, it's not always as easy for us to show how we are performing as it is maybe for finance and marketing, etc., to do so. All right. So today we're going to talk about some of these issues. And I want to make the point that I know when you see how HR measures its performance, I know that naturally we've all now come to understand HR analytics. But that's not really the only way in which we're managing our performance. So it's important for us to see the other ways in which we're assessing the HR's performance, as in addition to analytics, and predictive analytics now is where we are at. And we'll look at that a little bit later. So how are we defining what we're talking about, right? So I'm saying here that HR department performance plans summarize the near-term strategic and organizational priorities for each department, right, including itself. So they are designed to explicitly connect HR objectives to a system of achieving these priorities. HR performance is therefore defined as how well, right, the person in the department or the team in the department executes their job and duties of the HR. All right, that's what we're talking about here. So I'm also saying that many companies assess their HR performance either the month on a daily, where you've broken the plan of the HR into monthly reviews. They may be reviewing it on a monthly basis. They may be reviewing the performance on a quarterly basis, they may also review on an annual basis. But if they don't do monthly and quarterly, definitely they're going to review it on an annual basis, right? And this is done to define certain areas that needs to improve and to also encourage further success in areas that are meeting or exceeding expectations. So the HR department's performance evaluation is no different from any other department that is being assessed within the organization. So why should we measure HR performance and effectiveness? We need to measure the HR performance and effectiveness for a number of reasons. Number one, to ensure that we are effectively using the resources that are allocated to the management of the human resource or that are allocated to departments for people to deliver their jobs. We need to understand that we're using that effectively, or whether even the resources are not sufficient, right, for people to deliver their jobs. So we will not know if we are not effectively managing, right? We're not effectively reviewing our effectiveness in this area. It also means workforce and budget planning, making sure that if we are managing and monitoring how we're performing, we are able to plan our workforce, we are able to plan our budgets better, and we are able to also work to our budgets better. So that is why it's important to be able to effectively measure the performance of the HR. Understanding the overall impact of the HR, quite a few HR leaders don't really look at the impact of the HR. A lot of the assessments are very much task-based. And if you watched my webinar on setting meaningful KPIs, you see the point I'm making. Assessing HR duties is not measuring the overall impact of the HR department. It is not, right? It is your duties as in terms of general work that has to be done in the HR department, but that is not actually assessing the impact of the HR's overall performance or overall impact within the organization. And it's important we get to understand that, because sometimes that is what is affecting us in terms of the leaderships taking the HR function seriously and not just seeing it as an administration. It's really our ability to be able to understand and show the overall impact of the HR department, right? And that's usually a problem. So I guess this is why we're having this conversation about how we measure our performance and effectiveness. And then, of course, it's also about continuous improvement. Continuous improvement in terms of how the HR department is performing, and then also how the HR can improve the service that it's given to its beneficiaries, internal customers, is to make sure that systems and processes, if we're evaluating and reviewing our outputs and outcomes, this should help us to run the department better and also to support the organization better. So, I always say that the effectiveness of the HR department really does depend on the leader who is leading that department and how proactive or connected they are to making sure that the HR department is aligned to the business and is doing some of these important things that we're talking about, all right? So you will find that some departments, they just want to run an administration function of the HR. But for those of you who are running, who are in positions where you're having to business partner the business, or you're working at the strategic level, you know that, of course, these. Okay, so before we begin to look at some of these particular topic points in terms of what is affecting H and seems to be their performance is very easy for everyone to kind of see in terms of how they're reporting. But it's like when we report our HR, it seems like we are not really hitting it. Okay. So for this one, I actually intentionally did not create a slide for, because I wanted to put it to everyone so that people can unmute and tell in our HR's performance. And then I'm going to create that list with us as a group. So let me just, okay. So I'm asking the question, what is affecting HR's performance? What is affecting our performance, like in terms of impact, right? Is what I'm asking. So if you want to contribute, please just unmute or put your hands up, and then I'll unmute you if you can't unmute yourself. All right. So I'm asking, what is affecting HR's performance? What is affecting our performance? What makes it difficult for us to be able to perform or in our set plans or deliverables in our department? So the floor is open for contribution, please. What is affecting HR's performance? What do you think? There's no right or wrong answer to this, because there's a number of things affecting our performance. So please, if you want to speak, just unmute, or you can also raise your hands. Remember, this is a round table. We're supposed to be discussing. It's not for me to lecture you. Please, what do you think is affecting HR's performance? You can just unmute your mic and share with us. Hello? Anyone? The HR's performance. If it's a general for you, what in terms of your deliverables, what's affecting your performance? Anyone?
I think I sense some ambiguity in the question.
And
the reason is, whatever we would give as something affecting our performance is clearly under our control, be it non-acceptance, absence of resources, whatever. I mean, you cannot pinpoint it in that you have control. So personally, if there is something that affects us, it is something inherent in our own selves, but not something outside. But for sure, I start. But
so
I don't see anything.
So you're saying that you're saying that one factor that may be affecting our performance is on the HR leader or the HR team themselves. So it's like in the persons in the function themselves, right?
That is
Is that
what
what you mean?
I will say. Because
Okay.
even if a problem is outside, for sure, the one in charge to drive affairs, the job holder, the one occupying the role, and with us, nothing goes beyond, far, far beyond us. Is it about KPIs? Is it about your reporting manager not accepting your inputs? If he is not, that could easily be for a reason. If it's to me, needs to be investigated. Who knows whether you are even your own enemy? By the way, that is my contribution to this question.
Yeah.
But how
Okay.
I love
So
to
you
hear
mentioned,
other.
yeah, please do share, because we must identify our problem before we start looking at. Okay, so Sandra is saying unclear strategic goals, right? Very good. Unclear strategic goals. Anything else? Or you can put your responses in the chat as well, like Sandra just did. And she's saying that unclear strategic goals makes it challenging for HR to understand where to put in efforts to support the organizational goals. Yeah, this we come across quite a bit actually
No,
in
but the
consulting.
unclear HR department or the entire organizational strategic goals. Because the broader,
Okay, so
all of
Sandra, the
us,
question. Go
the
on.
HRs do not set sort of divergent goals, something far different from business goals. So here, are we referring to unclear HR goals or the entire business goals?
Okay. Okay, so Sandra is saying more, it's more about the entire organizational goal, because it's hard for you to set HR goals to align if there's no clear strategic or clear vision as to what the organization is doing, or it's not communicated. So she's saying is
So
the overall.
that is where if it is the business and the general strategic goals, nobody sets goals isolating key strategic holders and stakeholders of the business, including human resource practitioners. So, you guys will be assembled as a group. What plans do the HRs have? What about the sales department, operations, warehousing, what have you? So you that to set goals. Does it mean the HR's input was taken or wasn't taken?
Well, to be honest with you, Eric, speaking from a perspective of doing a lot of audits, you'll be surprised that a lot of the time what Sandra is saying is happening even in multinational organizations, even in Fortune 500 and what companies, where it's not like where sometimes you have they've got the goals they are delivering, and it is not clearly communicated, right? The mission is not clearly communicated, and or in SMEs or like large organization, you will find that it sits at the top of the leadership, right? So it's very reactive as to planned or a way of actually managing. It's not at all. It's more common than you would think, where the strategic goals are not clear. Although the organization is functioning, it's functioning in a way where it's kind of a needs to know basis, or as you know. So planning and alignment becomes a problem. Do you see what I mean? Becomes the problem. And if you have a leadership that doesn't believe in the HR function, as a leader it can be challenging to try to initiate some kind of strategic planning or strategic goal setting to kind of give a clearer direction to the organization. I mean, that's what we found in quite a number of audits. So a lot of the time when an organization obviously asks for an audit, it means they want to improve, but you will be surprised that there are organizations with no clear strategic objectives. So it makes it very difficult, not just for the HR department, but for other departments to measure. And I think that's where Sandra is coming from. You wanted
well,
to add a comment?
I'm trying to pick theoretically that works. Practically, I think fine. It could be true, and it is true, fine. But then we still have, as HR people, we still have a solution to it. If it is a multinational, fine. You could have your hands tied behind you. But then your site, your location, or your business unit, it depends on your relationship with your reporting manager and how you have managed to convince the system that you are there to actually effect a change. Whether they want to accept or not, I will put my plans in the system. I will pick you up, my managing director. You are driving the entire business. What do we stand for? Can you give me ABC? I'll be on you. And I'm sorry you cannot drive. And get what will help me drive the function in support of the entire business. I know the frustrations most of our people go through, but then we should know the politics of the game. Let us also resist. So
yeah.
we
So you're saying is challenging the status quo is what you're saying. So some of the other things that have come up in the comments has been lack of resources, inability to collect and analyze HR data to support our business cases. I think that was coming from Diane. When HR does not receive feedback early enough to meet deadlines. I think that was one coming from Joyce. And then Eric has added that challenging the status quo, like HR needs to challenge the status quo when things are not working or in place. Do we have any more in terms of what's affecting our performance? So you can either unmute and speak, like Eric was, or you can put your comments in the chat box, and I'll pick it up from there. Okay. All right. So we can see that there are factors that affect our performance, but I think the point Eric is making is that we must also contribute to those factors not changing by not maybe trying to challenge the status quo or being the drivers to try and improve or make a change in the factors that may be affecting our performance. All right. Okay. So let's move on. The second question I want to talk about, as you know, this is the summary of what we were talking about. We're talking about what is affecting our performance. All right. What is affecting our performance? And now I want us to look at some of the points of some of the ways in which HR's performance is actually looked at, all right? So that we can also identify if we're not operating in some of these areas or we're not managing some of these areas, that is also affecting the way that the leadership or the organization generally views our performance, okay? So I'm trying to make the point that there are other factors that we have to look at in conjunction with analytics, all right? So one is HR's credibility in the organization, right? So that's one way in which we are also assessing performance, okay? So what is the credibility of the HR department if I came into your organization and I asked the staff, what do you think of the HR? What are they going to tell me? Are they going to tell me the HR is switched on, is on point? We get information on time. People are onboarded on time. The HR is responsive. The HR can give you data. In fact, like what's the credibility you have built for the organization? How is it perceived? Because credibility is very important, because it goes to the next point in terms of how you're assessing how the HR is performing in the organization. It's also the position at which the HR is on the leadership table. So if you are in a scenario where you get to know what is happening last, then we know we have a problem, right? Because we should be at the table when the decisions are being made or the planning is being done, okay? And so that we are able to align what we need to do to support whatever initiative or strategic goal that the company is trying to do. So that's one way of assessing the performance of the HR. If the HR is having a good position seat at the leadership table. It's also the relationship between the HR and the leadership, and the influence the HR has over the leadership. So sometimes the HR may have very good relationship with the leadership. It has absolutely no influence, right? And by influence, I mean, where sometimes managers or leaders have not followed due process, and I'm speaking now with my arbitration cap on, we've not followed due process, and so we've gone and you've gone and terminated people because they said this person must go without following due process, right? Because that's what the leadership said. Instead of where the HR has influence, we say, no, we didn't do this, so we're going to have to do this in order to make sure that we're in line with compliance before we can do what you are asking me to do. A lot of the time, the HR does not have that influence, and it will literally take what the leadership is saying. Where the HR has influence, it's able to communicate and navigate the leadership to doing the right thing, right? And to following due process. So again, that's another measure of how you're assessing how the HR is performing, right? Okay. Then there's the deliverables or strategic plans, which will obviously come from the first question we asked as to what is affecting it. We need, where there's a strategic plan, the HR has to align the HR strategic plan to it. And here we're looking at how much of the strategic plan goals are you delivering, right? How many are even tracking the strategic goals or plans to be able to determine how much you're delivering in a fiscal year, all right? So that is another way in which where the HR is being assessed, right? From the leadership perspective and from the perceptions of the workforce, right? Quantity of HR deliverables on day to day, right? So this is where we've got our duties, right? We're tracking absenteeism, we're tracking L&D, how much of our deliverables, our day-to-day deliverables, are we delivering, right? Are you even tracking it? Okay, so this is very important, because these are the, let's say, some of the intrinsic things that go on around the HR that we may not necessarily be looking at, right? Because maybe the focus is on analytics, but these are key elements that are used to determine whether the HR department or the HR leader is being effective or is performing well in the organization. How engaged employees are with the HR. So if I came into your organization, I asked the employees, how interactive is the HR? They're going to say, well, the department, leader just sits in her office or his office. They don't interact. We see them once. We only see them when there's a disciplinary or grievance or termination. What would they say about your interaction with them, right? In terms of employees, okay? The relationship with employees within the HR. All right, and if you have any unions, what would the unions also say, right? That's also it. HR knowledge and capacity also is one way of assessing the performance of the HR. Is the HR knowledgeable, right, about the organization? Is the regulations, the laws, and all of that, that sits in the industry of the organization they are working in. Are they having the capacity to align the way they support the company to the industry requirements of the company, or is it just we are using the Labor Act, right? So what is the knowledge and capacity of the HR itself in terms of its proactivity to use this knowledge and capacity to deliver in its mandate, right? HR team delivering a good service. The HR team delivering a good service, or if you're a standalone HR manager or HR director, are you delivering a good service, right? A good service meaning, are you responsive? You know what? And if you are responsive, what's your response rate? Okay, are you measuring that? Okay, how reliable are your reports? How reliable are your forecast or predictive information? How reliable are you when it comes to giving advice on compliance or the legal side, right? What service are you delivering, right? What service are you delivering? And what are your customers, internal customers saying about this service? Okay, so this is also another way in which we look at assessing the HR, right? Let me bring this up. And then also,
Hello, everyone. Madam Anita will join us soon. I think she's experiencing technical issues. Please give her a few minutes. Thank you.
apologies for that. My internet went off, so technical issues. Apologies for that. Okay, so I was talking about the ways I'd gotten to talent pool as a way in which we assess the HR performance. Also, effective policies and procedures, okay, is also a way in which you assess the HR's performance. If our policy, you have issues, you have scenarios where, there's a HR policy and procedure that was written, I don't know how many years ago, and there is never any move to really update the policy, review the policy, even survey employees and leaders to find out how effective some of the policies are in order to improve upon them. It's not. It just becomes um, this manual or handbook that is there that doesn't really get updated. Even when things have changed and we're not doing some of the things in the handbook, we're not changing it. It's just there, but things have changed, right? And the only time we see the importance of this, I can tell you, is when there's an issue that people end up in the Labour Commission, and now the policy and all those things, they realize that they should have updated, right? So how our effective policies and procedures are up to date and how effectively they are working, because we are checking, a very important way of assessing how HR is also performing on the policies, which a lot of the time sits with our compliance as well. Level of learning and development of employees, in terms of, it's also another way of assessing how the HR is doing in terms of ensuring continuous learning in the organization. Effective diversity and inclusion and equality practices is also another important one. It tells you how current or apt, how the HR is looking at all of the areas that makes the organization be effective, right? And now these particular ones have become a very key aspect in the people management, and is one of the measures in performances for the HR. Employee engagement index and ratings. Are you doing employee engagement surveys to find out how engaged your workforce are? Are you checking the index? Are you trying to improve against index or ratings? If you're using the ratings, to see where the engagement levels are, right? And this is very important because in an organization where you're not really assessing engagement level and people are leaving, that a lot sometimes comes back to the HR's performance. It may be blamed on necessarily hiring the wrong people. It may be about our retention, our HR retention strategy, right? Because how we retain people also sits with us. And so it's important to do engagement surveys to help us to keep improving in all the key areas that we know we need to improve or keep going well in order to retain talent, all right? So we need to be checking that. We want to know whether we've got engaged staff or if we're operating with what we call in engagement free agents, okay? Free agents being employees that are with us, but they're just looking for opportunity to leave, right? Because they're not engaged for whatever reasons that are there in the engagement surveys. If we're doing them, we'll probably find out, right? So the employee engagement index and rating is another way of assessing HR's performance. We have good engagement ratings or index, then we know we're doing well with our people, initiatives, and activities, because that particular survey feeds back on all aspects of the organization. So we will know, and it's anonymous. So we know the feedback is genuinely telling us where we are at, right? And allowing us to improve and keep doing the things that we're doing. So if your index, you're not tracking this and your index is not great, then you know HR has to do some work around that. Progress and reward practices, right? How effective are they is also a way of looking at that. When we get into metrics, we'll look at that. Objective performance appraisals, overall company ratings. A lot of the time when appraisals are done, HR just reports what people have done and the departments have done. Hardly are we sometimes looking at the overall rating of the company against the strategic goals, okay? And whether even what we are rating in the appraisals is not duties, but actually strategic activities, right? So that's another way in which you will know is used to assess the HR's performance. And then, of course, we've got analytics, which is our day-to-day analytics, which we'll look at some in a minute. And then now, obviously, initially we were not really engaged well on HR analytics, but now a lot of you have taken courses and so on, and you've kind of understood the importance of analytics. However, we've now moved on to a next level of analytics, which is predictive analytics, okay, which is now where there's a higher place value because predictive analytics allows us to make predictions, right? So how the HR is assessed is also how well the HR is able to bring predictive analytics, all right? Okay, so having talked about the factors that are contributing to affecting our performance, and we discussed that, having kind of shared some of the ways that performance is assessed, that is not necessarily just on the metrics. I want to go on to our second discussion point for everybody, where I'm asking, what is, if we know the factors that may be affecting how we're performing, if we know some of the ways in which our performance is being assessed, then what is affecting our ability, right, as in the HR to effectively measure our performance, all right? So that is what I want us to talk about. And just like, yes, and I think Eric has made a point that analytics is a challenge area. Yes, we are going to talk about what is affecting our ability. And I think maybe perhaps that is one of them. So I'm going to come out of the main screen and go into this, because again, just like the last one, I want input from you, and then we'll look at some of the measures areas. So what is affecting the ability for HR to effectively measure its performance, right? So please, just like the first time, you can either put your comments in the chat box, or you can obviously unmute to share your points, right? So what do we think is affecting the ability of the HR to effectively measure its performance? What do we think? So Eric has kicked us off in saying analytics is a comment he made is a challenge area, right? So any more? Eric, maybe you want to elaborate on what you mean by analytics is a challenge area. Is it with us, or he's come off the phone? Eric, so I'm asking, you're saying analytics is the challenge area. Maybe you want to share with us, expand on that in terms of what.
Well, I will come back to ask if any of our attendees can define what we mean by HR analytics. Are we referring to issues, for example, say cost per hire, time to fill, as we all know, or it goes beyond it? Because there are some who would tell you that when it comes to HR analytics, it is about some of the HR metrics, time to fill, time to this. So it's confusing at times to get to know what this subject is all about. And having been fortunate to have this from you today, I think it's something we have to applaud you for that. It is better we dive deep into what analytics is as globally accepted, not as my business knows this is analytics.
Yeah. The contribution I want to make to analytics is that I remember that, I started doing training, that's the public training on analytics, I don't know, some time back. And then, of course, the other agencies all picked up and started doing analytics. And I know that the practitioners who attended my analytics sessions, I told them that, you know, for you to do analytics, you must first understand the questions and the basis for which you are working in. And that not all metrics are relevant for the organization for which you work in. There are common metrics that the HR department should track anyway. But there are, when we talk about strategically, the analytics dashboard you create must align. But what you find is that because analytics then became this thing where everybody, you know, it was analytics, and people went doing courses. People have done courses, certification, but they still don't understand it. Because I always say you can't, with HR, you must understand the grassroots of what is happening in order for you to be effective, right? In terms of your initiatives or when you are working at the top level. So for me, a lot of the challenge is that people are confused about KPIs and metrics. All right. So, and that is because I'm not sure what the context of some of how people have learned it. If that hasn't been explained well, you're going to struggle, right, to be able to do the analytics. Analytics is not just going around picking metrics all over the place, right? With everything, there is a technical approach to making sure you implement the right one for your organization, because you are working for organizations sitting in different industries, sectors, etc. No two organization is the same. It's only the common ones that we know we should track as a department, right? That you may find as a common denominator. When you come down to the strategic analytics, it will differ in terms of what's important to the organization, will really define your analytics framework. I mean, in a moment when we go and look at that, I'm trying to give examples to help people, to drop people. But yes, I totally agree with you that even though we keep mentioning analytics, even though people may have even done training in it, some of our leaders or our down to officers, down to different levels of the HR team still are struggling with how to move forward to make it efficient or effective for the measurements of the HR department. Yes, I would agree with you on that, that there's a little bit of work to be done in that space. Anything else, ladies and gentlemen, that we think is affecting the HR's ability to effectively measure its performance, right? Anything else? Please, you can put it in the chat or you can unmute to speak. Any more? What do we think is affecting our ability to measure? Okay, so I always, you know, on my webinar where I talk about meaningful KPIs, I make the point of saying that you saying you recruited 10 people, or you run the payroll for 12 months is not what we're talking about. That's duty, that's HR tasks, okay? But you reporting on time to hire, time to perform is an important matrix, because we are able to know when we hire people, how long it takes them to perform, which allows us to do predictions, right? So when the sales manager comes and says, I need someone by tomorrow or by the end of the month, if you're tracking time to hire, you know that that's not realistic or it's realistic. If you're tracking time to perform, you should be able to not just tell him how long it's going to take you to find the right talent, but also how long that talent it will take before they start performing, right? That's meaningful. But just saying we hired 10 salespeople and we onboarded them, that is not, it's an important task, i.e. in your duties, but that is not what we're talking about when we're talking about measuring HR's impact. I hope you will see the difference from the example I just gave you, all right? So I'm asking, what are the things affecting the HR in terms of effectively measuring its performance? Being able to say, this is the impact we have made as a department, right? This is what we have delivered that has impacted the bottom line. This is how we've impacted the employees. That's the question I'm asking. What is affecting us in not being able to do that is the question I'm asking, all right? So you can put the comments, please feel free. The point of this whole discussion is to make sure that we are talking about these things and we are generating ideas to help us to go back and do and improve on whatever we're doing, all right? So there's no right or wrong answers, it's a discussion. So feel free to bring your view, your points across. So we have here, someone's just posted in the comment, inadequate. I'll just pick it up and put it into the list. So they are saying, inadequate HR data gathering and choosing the wrong appraisal tool. Yeah. I don't know if you want to expand on that, but I think we can see your point here, but you can expand on it if you want. Inadequate HR gathering and choosing the wrong appraisal tool. Did you want to expand on that? Any more in what's affecting our ability to measure our performance? So now, the point about inadequate data gathering is, from what we've observed from HR audits, is that a lot of the time the systems are not in place to gather the data, or the HR is actually gathering the data, but it's not consistently doing it. So you have gaps in the data, okay? And if you have gaps in the data, it means that if you analyze it, you're likely to be given information that is not accurate. And if we give information that is not accurate, that affects the credibility of the HR, okay? So if we're going to do analytics, coming back to that point, we need to make sure we've understood how big data works for the HR, okay, which should be part of any analytics training you go on. You should cover the whole data side, right? So if we're not adequately gathering HR data, it becomes a problem to do effective analytics, let alone predictive analytics, okay? So if you know that, okay, this is an area, then you need to look at how you're going to go back and review how you're gathering HR data to speak to the analytics that you want to do or you are doing, right? You may want to review that. Then where the choosing of the wrong appraisal tool is also another issue, right? Because sometimes from experience of reviewing or developing appraisal tools, is that the definitions on the performance criteria are not well defined, or they are not objective or being substantiated. So really what you have is people just giving numbers, you know, so you keep getting skewed normal distribution, i.e., if the appraisal tool is correct, we should be having the bell curve, right? And if we're making sure that there's accountability in terms of definition and requirements of evidence in our tool, we're going to make sure that our managers are rating people based on what they've actually achieved, right? Than based on maybe how much they like them, or they don't want to deal with conflict, or whatever other reasons they are using other than what we need them to use to rate. So you will find that an organization, and I've lost count how many times in reviewing or assessing organizational overall performance for companies, where you will find that the appraisal outcome is saying that they've exceeded expectations. But when you go and you look at it against the strategic goals, they've only probably usually performed about 30 or 40% of the strategic goals. And when you go to look at the actual set activities and you organize them properly, you realize that actually they did not exceed performance. They were actually below performance or just met performance. All right. So using the right tool here is very important, and that really affects the ability of the HR to measure its performance. If our tool is not okay, it means our outcomes are not really giving us a true reflection as to how the organization is performing. You know, I hope you get what I'm what I'm saying from here. All right. So if you know that you've got the wrong tool or you need to improve on a tool, then I would recommend you put that as an action point in order to improve how you are measuring how the HR's effectiveness is measured, looking at the appraisal. Any more points, please, before we move on? Any more points on factors affecting us? You know, what is affecting the ability for HR to effectively measure its performance? And so far, we've had analytics, we have inadequate data gathering, and we've also had choosing the wrong appraisal tools. Does anybody want to add anything else to this list? Any more? Feel free. What is affecting you? Maybe look at it from your perspective, from your organizational perspective. What is affecting you in the HR in terms of measuring the performance of the department? What's affecting you? Maybe look at it from your any more? Okay. All right. So we'll move on. Thank you for the contribution, for those of you who did. So now I'm asking, from the question there, we're asking, how do we measure HR's performance? All right, so we're going to look at that now. I'm going to project my screen. At the end, of course, I'll come back to you for any Q&As or contribution. So now, measuring HR's performance, we looked at the soft side, right? That was the bit that I was talking to you about, the ways HR is assessed. And I gave you the soft side, right? That one is by perception, observation, or actually as checking. But the hard side of how the HR performance is measured is around the analytics, right? It's around the metrics. That's the hard side, okay? So now, a lot of the time, it's first understanding what exactly is it that you're trying to measure when it comes to the performance, right? I'm not talking about KPI here, because here we're looking at how we measure our performance, okay? And the metrics and things we're using must be coming from the KPIs or the KRAs that has been set. So assuming that is the case, we are looking at, number one, HR service delivery, because that is one of our primary areas to support our internal customers, okay? And so if you've done analytics, you must ask questions before you start looking at metrics. Questions like, is the HR team itself delivering a good service, right? How are you going to know this? You go ask your internal customers. Through the survey we discussed, the employee engagement, right? It can be there, or you can do an HR survey where you're just asking all questions around the delivery of the HR within the organization. How effective is the induction program? You can ask all the people that come in, the new hires, those who have come in the past to give you feedback. This can all be on this HR service delivery survey. Are employees being developed sufficiently? How likely are employees to recommend the company? How do employees rate the performance management? All this can be done through this HR survey, right? Now, it's important in analytics to ask the questions, because the questions that you are asking should now help you lead to the metrics that you're going to be use to assess, right, the performance of the HR service. Okay, so for example, from some of these questions, some of the metrics we may want to look at is return on investment, right, in terms of service delivery, in terms of the budgets that have been put in to the HR department to run the HR department. So this would be the HR, right? So return on investment is looking at the investment, meaning the budget or the funds that have been given to the HR department to manage the HR. And if you go and listen to my meaningful KPI, you know that one of the key metrics for this, in terms of outside of doing a return on investment analysis, is also to look at the HR expense factor. Right? If you want to know more about that, you can watch that webinar. But it's very important to assess this, because obviously that is strategic bottom line impact we're talking about here, right? So return on investment, HR experience factor is all very key metric assessments to show the service delivery perspective. Benefits or satisfaction, failure rate of new hires. It's all about service delivery, right? Because we are responsible for these areas. Training effectiveness. You know, are you measuring training effectiveness, the return on investment on training, right? Is very important because that speaks to this return on investment we're talking about. Performance of new hires. Are you tracking time to hire and time to perform? Two very key metrics on talent management there. HR service satisfactory rating. Are you even tracking that? Are you asking your okay, so we have your employees about that. So someone put perceptual distortion, lack of clear objectives. I think that was for affecting our measurements. So I'll go and add that at the end onto the list. Okay, so service delivery is an area that you should be measuring in terms of your performance, right? Then we move on to the next one. Efficiency and effectiveness should be something you are also looking at, right? In terms of measuring the HR performance. So again, before we go around looking at metrics, we should know what questions we're asking. So are we recruiting through the most effective channels, right? Do you even track that? Do you track where your candidates are coming from? So if we know that when we post on LinkedIn or when we post on Facebook or Instagram, or we even use the traditional way, which is a newspaper, right? Let's say the Graphic or the Times or something, right? Are you tracking where the candidates are coming from, one? Number two, when you actually hire, do you find out where that candidate came from? Because if you are, then it makes sense that if 50, 60, or 70% of the people we are hiring are actually coming from posts on LinkedIn or the Graphic newspaper just to bring balance, then why would we be spending money, right? If we're getting a wide pool coming from these space. Sometimes we put adverts in different places to widen the pool, but that should be strategic. We shouldn't just do it just for the sake of widening the pool. If where we are tracking the channel, we see that we get a good wide of a different range of candidates coming, then that's what we need to focus on. We shouldn't just be doing it just so we need to widen the pool. So we're spending money on job boards and things we don't need to, when we really are tracking, we can see where we're getting the best talent from. So this is some of the things, right? Well, ask the question, then you track the matrix. How effective are we at recruiting the competencies of the business and the business needs, right? That's why I'm making a point earlier. Are we doing inventory, skills inventories? Are we actually trying to understand what our core competencies are, right? What are the primary, we call primary, secondary, right? And need good to have, right? What are they? What are the costs per hire? What's it costing us, right, to hire one person? I know we know maybe by the end of the year, we may look at some of the work we've done in this. We know that the last time we did this exercise, I think it was in 2019 or something, when we looked at the cost per hire in Ghana, the cost per hire on content generally. I think it was about, for junior staff, not even management staff, if off the top of my head, I'm not mistaken, it was about 25,000 Ghana cedis. Now, if we redid it, it will be higher, right? You need to understand how cost per hire operates, and you need to be tracking, you need to be looking at it, right? What are the training costs? So if it's costing us 25,000 cedis to hire one person, I think you get the point I'm making here, right? In terms of our retention strategies and making sure that we're hiring the right people with the competencies. Because that means if we hired the people with the wrong competencies, for each time we have to terminate during probation, calculate. If we terminate 3 people or even 4 people in a year, calculate by the cost of hire. You can see. right? So these are some of the matrices you need to be looking at, and you will be able to look at them when you're asking the question. What are the training costs, and did we get return on investment? If you will not do any analysis on training, please, return on investment on training is something you should do. And I think in one of our webinars, we explain how that whole process goes, right? So maybe if you check it out on our YouTube channel. How effective are the different types of training? Are you tracking that? Okay, so the point I'm making is the questions you're asking, whether it's under service or efficiency and effectiveness, you now go and look at what are the metrics that I should be looking at, what are some of the common metrics that I use to measure here. Please remember the point I'm making, that industries and companies differ. So you need to make sure, if you align with the strategy, what actual metrics is important. But there are some that we track as HR regardless, because those insights are key to how we manage the function. And I've just shared some with you. Cost of hire, training is all part of it. And one of the key metrics is always on return on investment metrics that we have to consistently be looking at across any area of the HR that we're looking at the performance. So on the metrics here, in terms of assessing HR internal efficiency and effectiveness, you look at return on investment, cost per hire, average time taken to fill vacancies, right, recruitment channel analysis, and so on, right? Because here we're looking at how these are all bottom line issues. So we're looking at how well we're doing that. Then auditing, I only chose to look at 4 areas, right, for the purpose of this session. But I think some do speak to the other areas as well. Auditing HR compliance, okay? Now, this is a big deal because we are, in fact, our first protocol is to protect the liabilities of the company, and that is through compliance, okay? So our policies and practices up to date. I made a point of policy manuals that are just dated. They are not updated. We're not checking their effectiveness. They are just there, right? Are employees properly trained on new policies and practices? We just literally give it to them. They give us the sign, read, whether they read them, we don't know, right? Are you actually creating? Now you see, there is no need for us to have to be sitting in rooms to be doing some of these things. If you're being a proactive leader, you could just pick the policies, pick all the key highlights, create slides, and record yourself even explaining the policies, and that could be part of the induction. So instead of giving it to them to read, where we know a lot of the time they don't read it, we can get creative in how we get them to actually read the policies and procedures. Other things is to make it a little bit more interesting. It all depends on the company you're working with, but does our policy manuals always have to be so, legalese? How light is the words and so on? There are ways you can improve the policy manual to make it more readable. But if we are talking about properly training new employees or employees, there are different ways now we can actually share these policies with them to make it more interesting. And I'm saying technology is here, embrace it, right? To help with some of these areas. Do employees understand key policies and practices? Are we even checking, right? I remember when I was in paid employment a very long time ago, one of the ways I used to deal with health and safety is to do health and safety quizzes. It became this big competition. I now have to bring in a CAP and certification because departments now begin to take it seriously because they want to be the department who wins this quizzes. Let's get creative, right? Because really getting people to manage compliance is not easy. So we need to get creative in how we're getting employees to understand these things, right? Is our employee handbook up to date? Are we meeting our equality and diversity obligations? Those of you who are actually taking this form, how are you assessing these things? Or is it just a statement sitting there, right? So these are the questions. Now, if we're going to assess some of the metrics here, will be percentage of employees trained in company policies, right? If we're really checking, we'll also check the knowledge, right? The effectiveness of it. And we also should be able to observe through some of the issues that come out, right? Salary competitiveness, diversity rates and employee demographics. Are you collecting this information? Are you reporting on this information in your monthly or quarterly reports or even annual reports, right? Gender pay gaps. Are you looking at the whole pay issue? Number of diversity initiatives. As I said, the metrics you look at, it really depends on questions you're asking, what the strategy of the organization is, and what is important, right, to the organization. But there are some, as I keep saying, we should be tracking. So for here, for example, salary competitiveness would be one that we should be tracking. Percentages of employees trained in company policies should be one we should be tracking. Generally as a department, okay? Diversity, demographics, you should be collecting anyway, right? And diversity inclusion, you all know I champion that, is the way that we need, because we want to have diverse organizations that can grow into the future of work. There's no point having a stagnant organization. So if you're not managing diversity, inclusion, equity, equality, it's a problem, right? So if depending on whether you're having even a plan or a strategy for, if you are, you should be tracking it, right? So that's on auditing. And I know there's lots more compliance that we can look at. This is just a point of discussion to get you thinking. Then the last area that I chose to look at was HR outcomes, right? So now, are you even tracking your HR outcomes, right? So questions, how happy and satisfied are our employees? How engaged are employees with their work and the organization? What is our employees' turnover, right, rates? Are you tracking your turnover rate? What is our absenteeism? And just to the point on turnover rate, we need to understand that, because that's why my slogan is we must be insight-led and data-driven. Somebody will say, oh, well, you know, we just have a low turnover, so I don't need to track the raise or do, like, I don't need to look at this. Yes, you do, because there's also another side where we could be retaining people who are not fit for purpose for the organization. So the same way we want to know why people are leaving, we should also make it a priority to look at why people are staying. So if it's good reasons for staying, we maintain it. And if the reason for staying isn't great, we do something about it, all right? Then what is our absenteeism rate, right? Are we tracking, right? What is the impact of our training? Are we looking at the outcomes? Outcomes, this will be part, right? And again, if we're asking these questions on which area we're looking at, we also need to now look at what types of matrix should we look at. So we look at things like, so if we're saying how happy and satisfied are our employees, one of the areas that we use is employee net promoter score. So and the score of that determines where you really are in terms of happy and satisfaction, in the sense that, are they ready to promote the company to their friends and family and to other people, right? That's analysis is very important. It's the same as the employee engagement, where we're looking at how engaged are they whilst they're within the organization. These are very key metrics for checking satisfaction and engagement, okay? So you may want to look at your ENPS, employee satisfaction index. You can actually look at that in your survey I mentioned earlier. Absenteeism rate, you can look at it if you're tracking it. Employee productivity rate, you can look at it if you're tracking it. Average length of service, you can look at it if you're tracking it. Attrition rate, if you're tracking it. And let me make a point of defining what I mean by tracking. It came from the point that was made about gathering data. So tracking means if we're gathering the data, right, then we are able to do this analysis. You will not be able to do anything we're talking about here if you're not collecting this information. So if, as we're talking, you are saying that, no, I need to do some of this, then it means you now got to go back, put the system in, track over, collect the data over a period of time, and then you'll be able to apply some of these analysis, okay? So please, this is the approach. When we talk about analytics, I'll repeat, we must first understand the foundations of it. We must understand what is how it aligns with the organization or the industry we're working in. We need to understand it from the perspective of the business of strategic plan and alignment of the HR strategy, which all feeds into the type of analytics we decide to do and track and see on our dashboards, okay? So we can't just go around picking strategic ones that have no bearing on our current organization. But the ones that, as the HR department, we know that regardless of the ones we've got for the organization, for the leadership have said, this is important, we want you to track it because it's in line with what we're trying to do, we also have ones that as a department, just like sales and marketing will do, we should be tracking anyway. We should be reporting on it anyway. And it's important to know normal day-to-day analytics the HR should be tracking, and then the strategic analytics that the HR should be tracking. All right. Okay. So these are some of examples I've just given you. All right. So absenteeism, for example, is one we should be tracking. Productivity rates, we should be tracking. We should be tracking employee net promoter scores and all of that at once. We should be tracking because they allow us to make predictions, to do predictive analytics. If you're not tracking it, it's going to be very difficult, right? To do the analytics, let alone for in terms of predictive analytics. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. Oh. When I come out of the screen, I'm going to stop here and now come back to you. Right, come back to you for your comments before we wrap up and close. Does anybody want to contribute to how we measure the HR performance, or any of you doing some of these that you want to share with other people on the call? Because it's about sharing. So yeah, I know we didn't break up into groups and that, but we can still share, right? Any comments?
I gave a brief comment out there that your students could have their bags.
The student could have.
The comment is a request for some few minutes break, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, just to take a stroll.
Oh, okay. You want to take some time out?
Not for me as a person, but all your students listening to it.
Yeah. Because we cannot do this.
Yeah,
because we cannot do this. Usually we break into groups, and actually I've not done that. But because we do this within a time span, we don't usually really take breaks in between. So, but we're about to wrap up anyway, like in the next few minutes.
Oh.
Usually we don't usually take, but we usually just, because it's a short session. The maximum we give to this is usually 2 hours. Sometimes we go a full hour, sometimes we are less. It depends on how engaging or the topic that we're talking about. Okay, so did anybody want to make any comments about some of these areas? Are anybody using some of these areas in currently measuring the HR performance? Please feel free, either put it in the comments or you can also unmute to speak. I'm going to go and put the last the contribution to the list here whilst we do that. Or anyone has a question, a comment from the discussion we just had on how we're measuring performance. Okay.
Yeah.
Please feel free.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hello, hi. Your line is not as clear. We can hear you, but it's giving you a robotic voice. Do you want to type? Do you want to type your comment or when
let me type.
So I can...
Okay, let me type my comments.
Okay, we can hear you. We can hear you now. Improved.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yes, I think you mentioned predictive analytics. Yes. I know. The whole data analytics landscape has expanded. So we even have what we call the prescriptive and that of descriptive analytics. Well, I know the HR should be able to describe a certain phenomenon or situation using descriptive analytics. And at the same time, HR should be able to make prescriptions as to what should be done, what's not to be done, and everything. So Yes, I think we should also, as an HR, you should also look at the other dimension, which I've mentioned, the prescriptive and then that of the descriptive aspect of analytics. Yes.
Yeah.
So this is my contribution. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Well, I love the contribution made by brother, but can he differentiate between the two?
Yes. Please, can you hear me?
Yes,
yes,
please.
I can, sir.
Yes. When you look at descriptive analytics, it's basically the HR having the ability to use data to describe a certain phenomenon, how the whole thing is happening, and what's causing it. Then when we talk about prescriptive analytics, it's about they take prescriptions or giving a measures or way forward as to how to solve the issue. That's the prescriptions. And the predictive analysis basically based on the historical data to analyze what they call the situation, so that you can give a prediction into the future. So there's a slight, or let's say, differences between these three dimensions I've mentioned. Because one is more present, the prescriptive is more of the future, and that of the predictive is more of the future, and the prescriptive is more of the present. So there are some slight difference in there, but
so
they have some commonalities. Yes.
Yes. So you probably align the descriptive to the analytics, and you may align the prescriptive to the predictive analytics, to simplify it.
Yeah.
All right. So
yes.
Yeah. So very good. So that's a good point for us. Any more points on other ways that we can be measuring the HR performance? We looked at how we're assessing it, and the assessing it wasn't just about analytics. We looked at other things, but now we're actually looking at the analytics and predictive side, which is actually looking at measures, right? So any more comments or suggestions, please? If you do, just you can always write it in the comments box there before we wrap up. Okay. Any more? Okay. All right. So we'll just move on to wrap up. And I'm assuming, I just want to ask, maybe you can put your answers in the comments box, whether you've gotten the gist of the conversation around how we're measuring the HR performance, from some of our issues that may be affecting our ability to do that, to the way that the HR is being assessed in terms of its performance. And then now we're talking about how we're measuring the performance, looking at the analytics and the predictive analytics I made reference to. Have we all kind of gotten a general gist of that? So you can put your comments, your comments in the comments box. If you've now gotten a gist, so now going away, you are able to go back, look at your function, and begin to look at how you can improve, right? In order to improve the way that the HR performance is being measured. All right. Okay, so let's move on. All right, so okay, so to sum up, right, to measure the effectiveness and the performance of the HR, we know that there are some key metrics that we should look at. Okay, so just to help you there, we have the employee net promoter score, which I mentioned earlier, the engagement rate, the employee turnover rate, retention rate, absenteeism, training effectiveness. Sorry. Oh. New hire performance, I've also mentioned one of the other ones that's very good is time to perform. Cost per hire, internal mobility rates. That is talking about how people are moving from promotions, transfers, and so on. Now, this sometimes, obviously the larger the organization, the more mobility, the more people are moving, so the higher the mobility rate. If your organization is a flat organization or it's not have as many internal mobility rate, but it's still a good one to track, because if we're not promoting people professionally, we're not promoting people in a normal hierarchical way, it's a problem, right? Because that means we may start losing talent and all of that. So it's an important one to track. Cost of HR per employee, HR tech return on investment. So if you've invested in HR softwares and dashboard, how is it, what's the return on that investment? Employee tech user adaptation rate is important. The reason why I'm mentioning the tech bit is because we've evolved now, right? We evolved very fast into the whole automation space during the COVID period. Some people have reverted back, others haven't. They've seen the importance of technology. And even if you haven't fully automated as an organization, definitely you're going to have areas of your organization where technology is playing a role, right? So we're asking, if you are having tech moving, you should be actually tracking these metrics there, all right? Okay, now I see some chat points, so I want to read them. Okay, so we have measuring employee satisfaction. So it says, when HR is open and friendly, you can even have employees approaching you anywhere and expressing their views. Exactly. So that's it. How, and it goes to the satisfaction and the happiness of the employee. How are they even interacting with you? Right? These are all actually, you can also, as an observation, you can actually check in the surveys. It's a very good point. There are some places where the employees would dare not even go near the HR department, let alone say hello. That is not probably the best way for us to be handling our function. We are there for the people, for the leadership, and for the organization to run effectively. So it's very important that both leadership and employees, unions, feel comfortable to approach us. If we are unapproachable, we have a bit of a problem, right? In terms of the performance and effectiveness of the department. If your customers cannot approach you, that obviously is going to affect performance in a number of ways. Then also the other point made was about, in terms of what HR is doing right or wrong, is also another point. Then, okay, so the explanation on the descriptive analytics. So here, he's saying descriptive analytics use data to understand past and current HR performance. Descriptive analytics uses optimization to identify the best alternative to minimize or maximize HR objectives. And video analytics predict the future by examining historic data. Okay, so he came to give some clarifications there. Okay, all right. So we move on in conclusion. I'm just reminded I had like 10 minutes. So in conclusion, we're saying that the HR performance management matters and is key to the success of the people function. Okay, we cannot be in charge of this important function and not put in systems to effectively manage its performance. Okay, and I'm saying that it's essential to set up the right processes and metrics to measure the effectiveness and the performance of the HR department so that we can actually report on our impact to the organization, and also in terms of our contribution, right, to the organization, right? And generally, we also want to know how we're performing so we can keep performing and we can keep improving, right? So it's very, very important. So in terms of action, as always, from this, definitely you'll be taking notes and you're going to have a whole lot of ideas running through your head on things you want to go back and look at, having looked at some of this. So I want to encourage you to review the current ways in which you are evaluating the HR to see whether some of the things we've talked about you are capturing, or you can now begin to incorporate into how you're measuring your functions. So a review is always important before we start making changes, right? Set meaningful KPIs. And as I said, there's a whole webinar I've done on that. Understand what is meaningful KPIs and what isn't. It's very important to being effective at this. Set the meaningful KPIs. KPIs, when we talk about meaningfulness, I think you can already see some of them, right? It's not about the day-to-day. It's about the KPIs that align with the strategic goals or impact, right? In terms of information to make decisions about the people. Measure the HR performance using effective metrics, okay? So the metrics are there are many, but you must pick the ones that are relevant to your organization, okay? Okay. Now, so of course, you know, we are into the HR and we do a lot of activities. So we do have the HR analytics and predictive analytics training. Some time back, we kind of stopped doing public training. So you don't really see posts and promos out there about our public. We tend to do a lot more in-company or team training because we found that that's more effective. So we're usually training HR teams or managers on some of these areas that we specialize in. But we do have the HR course on analytics and predictive analytics, which is one of our new ones coming out. HR dashboard training. I'm always encouraging you to attend this particular one because once you learn the analytics, you need to be able to create dashboards. Some of you, you're not having HMRSs, whether in the cloud or in the company, to run these automated analysis for you. You're using Excel and things. So you should know how to create dashboards using Excel, right? How you create your database using Excel or even Access. So I'm always encouraging you, you know, as a practitioner, you've got to find ways of using the tools and resources you have. Maybe you've put to ask for HRMRS for the company to invest in that technology and they are not, but you still need to do this. So if you're using Excel, you learn how to use the Excel to do it. And a lot of what we're talking about, we don't need to it doesn't need to get complicated if you understand how you're creating your data in Excel and then how you're running your graphs or your analysis and then how you're creating that dashboard. So if you've not done that, I encourage you that if you see us running this, we don't run this dashboard one very often, but if you see us running it, I encourage you to participate. If you've ever been to our training, you know, we take a very experiential learning. We're all about transfer of learning. We don't believe in just putting slides in people and not actually showing people how to do it. So our actual workshops, you come and you learn and you go back and you apply. So I encourage you to understand dashboards, right? Because they go hand in hand with all these analytics we're talking about. We have our, this is our only public training we're about to launch. I think we've been talking about it in our social handles, but we're launching it. It starts in October. This is our practical HR training program. This program, I've been running it since I entered the continent in 2010. I've now expanded it into a program because I've come to understand that the HR practitioners are learning the degrees and masters and whatnot. When it comes to the technical competence to apply, it's not easy because that is not really taught in the classroom, is learned in the field. And as a consultancy, we are in the field working with all kinds of industries, all kinds of companies, small, medium, large, multinationals, all across the continent and into the developed space. So we have come to understand a lot of the technical competence and key things that the HR, whether you're the leader, officer, administrator, assistant, needs to know in order to be effective in running that department, right? So the practical HR managers training course is for those people who want to either do a refresher, who moved into the HR, they've not really had the actual technical competence in learning around the functions of the 11 functions of the HR, or you want to make sure that you want to be able to review your HR department and put it in order because maybe you inherited it, right? If you're looking for the practical technical skills, then this course I'm recommending for you to take it up. It's a 3-month short course. It comes with field work. So really we're requiring either you're working, and if you're not working, we will provide you with the field exercise, but it generally will make sure that we are making sure that participants who attend get to experience some of our field in a way for us to assess that they've been able to develop some of these technical competencies anyway. So I'm encouraging you, if you're trying to develop practical skills that you can implement, that you can very quickly see and do something about, this is a program you should actually sign up for. This is not a degree course, this is practical. Our profession is a practical profession. It's an experience-based profession. And it isn't about sitting in the classroom, it's about doing. So some of these things have to be shown, all right? So your HR department, your HR data records, how you're setting up these records, all of these things are very important, because if your record gathering is not okay, you can't do these analytics we're talking about. What are you even doing around analytics, right? Understanding the component, and then for everything we teach you, you now go and do. Is that doing that, we assess and then we approve, right? So here is really testing for technical competencies. Is what we're assessing here, not your knowledge. Well, your knowledge of the HR will be important. We're expecting people would have done a degree or some form of qualification in the HR coming on here, so you can draw on that knowledge. This is a practical course, all right, that is all around helping you improve your department or set up your department, etc. So we put the information out there, so if you're interested, you just need to connect with myself, or if you go on the site, you inquire, the team behind will engage you, all right? So that's how we can help in helping you to build build your competencies, all right? So on that note, usually we will upload the recording onto our YouTube channel for you to go and view later on if you want, so you can have access to the slides there. And that's pretty much it. So unless anyone has any questions, if you don't have any questions.
No question from my side, but with the practical training you mentioned, and do you certify your people?
Yes, so when you finish, we will give you a certification, we will certify you. And I want to make the point that this is competency-based. You see, I want to give an example of how we're assessing the competencies. When we talk about technical competence, we know, for example, if we take recruitment, it has a cycle, right? It has a cycle that you should be following, and there is a technical approach to following that cycle. People do it in their own whatnot. Here we are looking at giving you the technical competence, but also in recruitment, there's a whole assessment element of recruitment. And you find that most HR practitioners only know interviews, right? So here we're going to teach you the technical competence of putting work sample tests together. You need to be testing basic competencies of candidates. Interviews are not enough, right? And if you don't know how to do competency-based interviews, you're using interviews and it's just a pot of luck that maybe you just pick the right CV, all right? So we're looking at the whole technical competence around the whole cycle. When we're placing adverts, are we using the ADA principle? Sometimes you see adverts and if you're not getting responses, why? Because maybe your ADA principle is not in line, right? So here we are just trying to give the practicalities that you can easily apply and do. Sometimes people take on jobs and they are to set up the HR department. They have no idea where to start. If you ask an HR leader, what would you do when you first start in your HR role? The first thing they'll tell you is, I'll do an HR audit. And their idea of an audit is doing a policy audit. No, HR audit is not about policies and procedures alone. All right. So you need to know your technical competencies to make you effective, because that effectiveness is going to contribute to these performance measures we are talking about. Okay. So we have observed through audits, through the work we do, that this is an issue. So I've extended this course and the other resource persons, etc., to make sure that we begin to build the competencies to practice. It's very important. Some of these things we're talking about, people are not able to do, even measuring absenteeism rate. Can't be in an HR function and not be able to do some of these things. And sometimes it's not that the person can't do it, it's that they don't know where to begin or even what they're supposed to be gathering to help them to do this. And that is what we want to focus on, building those competencies, giving the understanding of grassroots foundations of why we're doing what we're doing, which sometimes is not always being taught in the courses and the degrees and things that people have gone to, because that really depends on where you're doing your degree and all of that and who is teaching you. Okay, so for us, we want to focus on the practical side, the work, the duties, the deliverables, because we believe that you've done your knowledge, the degrees and all of that, but the practice is where there's a lot of gaps. Okay, and that's what we want to focus on, because that's what we do. We are practitioners. All right, so practitioners showing practitioners is going to have a better result than academia trying to show practitioners. That's the perspective we're coming from. All right, so if you're interested, I'm going to do a whole this thing on it. Do come and, do join. I don't think you regret attending that particular course if you feel it's something you want to do. We're starting with this one. We are going to get higher with some of the higher level staff for those who are in the directorships and stuff. But even as a director, I wouldn't say what would be wrong for you not to do a refresher on a practical HR, because sometimes we've kind of moved up in certain things we didn't get an opportunity to develop. So we get a chance to refresh and we should also take those opportunities. All right. So you just keep an eye on our handles and that will be shared. Okay. So, on that note, do we have any questions? Okay, I can see in the comments an expression of interest. So I'm taking the information down and one of our staff will contact you on the practical HR session. Okay, so I hope you found this really useful. All right, and I hope you will join us in our last session, which will be in December, for us to conclude the year on looking at how we're going to write impactful report, maybe as the fiscal year. I haven't decided on the topic yet, so I hope to see you all there. And of course, you can access the recording on the YouTube channel. So I want to say thank you very much for joining me, and I look forward to sharing some time with you next time when we meet for discussion. I hope you found the discussion very useful, and thank you so much for your contribution and participation. It's been very, very insightful as well for me. Thank you so much. Have a good day, and until the next time. And of course, you can connect with me on LinkedIn and my social handles. LinkedIn, if we're talking on the whole business front, and a little bit more relaxed on the other functions if you want to connect there. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anita.
Thank you. Eric, I think you should reach out to me so that maybe in our subsequent sessions, we can have you sharing sessions and stuff, because your insights are very good.
Ever. All the best, guys.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.